producers such as Pioneer Natural Resources and Centennial Resource Development have warned investors that the life of the shale industry, well, it may be exaggerated. Our guest says investors are losing faith in U.S. shale plays, and that fatigue is very visible. We're joined now by Art Berman, geological consultant with Labyrinth Consulting Services. He's in Houston. Art, always great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the show again.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Art, before we get going, just to remind the viewers of your thesis on the shale, you reckon it's not so much a revolution as a retirement party, as you put it, for U.S. oil. It's a poor resource that they only turn to after other stuff started running dry.
Yeah, that's right, Andrew. I mean, it's a viable resource. It's it's good oil in every respect, but it's expensive to produce. And of course, there's been all kinds of jubilation about how prices are coming down, and they have the cost of production. But most of that is due to a depression in the oil business, just devaluation of service company costs. Very little of that's really got to do with ingenuity or technology. So the simple fact of the matter is that this tight oil has actually pushed the price of oil up about 2.5 times what it was about 10 years ago.
That's interesting, because we've heard, oh, it's been a technological revolution. They're putting in more sand. They've rewritten the rules of the game. You think in part it's simply because there was lots of equipment and skilled people sitting around?
Well, yeah, the drilling rigs have been going for, basically a loss, and all the oil field service companies, just to survive, have been slashing their prices. This is what always happens when you have a systematic devaluation of commodity prices, not specific to oil. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a technological revolution going on, the horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. This is real, and I think that we need to give credit where it's due, but it comes at a price. And that's the part that we're just not really hearing that much about. So all these great high rates, they're drilling the wells, twice as long a length and much more sand, bigger fracs. And so we have to look at, how is this affecting the actual unit cost, the price per barrel to produce? And it's more than it was a few years ago.
Even a luminary like Harold Hamm of Continental Resources, seen as one of the fathers of shale, is saying that projections for growth from this play are exaggerated.
What he's saying, Andrew, is that the U.S. government, Energy Information Administration, has overestimated U.S. production, and the expectation of all this additional supply is dragging down prices. Now, I don't exactly know where Harold Hamm is coming from, but EIA has adjusted their forecast downward. What they say is an estimate based on samples, and as real data becomes available, they've adjusted. So, that's a blame game that he's playing. The reality is that prices are low because they're low, and U.S. oil is trading at a discount to international prices for all kinds of very good reasons, not the least of which is the fear premium in the Middle East with Qatar and the Kurdistan referendum, etc.
Now, the boss of Centennial Resource Development, quoted by the Wall Street Journal, as saying there are no new shale plays that have come forward. Their ability to spurt forth infinite streams of oil is really just a myth. After the Permian, I mean, you reckon the Permian still has legs, but is that it? Will America find another big shale basin?
I would hate to say no, but the CEO of that company is correct that none have emerged. Now, there is supposedly a play that is growing in Texas. EOG has been sort of the founder of it. It's called the Buddha. They haven't been drilling any wells out there, so probably the economics are not very good at these prices. But fundamentally, the statement is correct. We are not dealing with an infinite resource. We're dealing with a finite resource. And everybody just needs to kind of take a breath and get used to the fact that the Permian Basin is the play of choice, but that as far as I can tell, its proven reserves are in fact somewhat smaller than the other two big plays, the Bakken and the Eagle Ford. Now, that will change with more drilling and higher prices, but the simple fact is I get this information from the companies themselves that report it to the U.S. government. This is not some interpretation of mine. This is actually what they report. And, you know, there's maybe 3.5 or 3.7 billion barrels of proven reserves as of the end of 2016, less than the other plays.
We pay a lot of attention to the new rig count in the United States. That's been flattening off lately. What numbers, though, should investors look at? Should they look at uncompleted wells, drilled wells, rigs in the field? Can you give us a quick primer on that, Art?
Well, rig count is a good way of measuring the flow of capital expenditure. That's where the companies are directing the capital, a lot of which comes from other people's money. It's very important to recognize that almost none of these companies can pay for their capital expenditures with cash flow from operations. They're utterly reliant on a continuous flow of other people's money to make up the difference. So what I would look at, first of all, as an investor, is look at their income statements and balance sheets. Look at their capital expenditure to cash flow ratios. For most of them, they're spending more than they're making. That can't be a good sign, and I think that's what investors are starting to complain about. So rig count is useful, but look at the number of wells completed every month. Rigs don't produce oil, wells do. So that's the real number we need to look at. How many new wells are being brought on, and how effectively does that offset the rather considerable, about 30% per year decline rate of the existing wells? That's the key.
Now, we've heard central bankers hinting and other investors warning that this free money for a decade has caused asset bubbles. In part, has shale been inflated by cheap loans or free loans? And could that come to an end as interest rates rise?
Certainly, there's been a production bubble. I mean, let's face it, it was the production bubble from U.S. shale and Canadian oil sands that brought about, at least superficially, the collapse of oil prices in 2014. So, yes, that has been an issue. But as you said, the rig count is flattening out. It takes a long time to convert drilled wells to producing wells. And that's something that I think a lot of analysts have missed, that the pressure pumping industry, the frac crews, the equipment fleet is in such a state of disrepair after the oil price collapse that they can drill all the wells they want. There simply aren't the crews and equipment available to convert it into supply. That's the key. And that situation, I don't think, is going to change appreciably for quite some time. This is not a trivial matter to fix.
We've less than a minute left, Art. I just want to ask you one last thing, just big picture. You reckon that the financial crisis was in large part not so much about mortgages and banks, but oil getting to $140. Just remind us of your thesis there, please.
Yeah, I mean, everything depends on oil. It underlies everything in our economy, and when oil prices went that high, it resulted in 4 or 5% inflation. We had a lot of mortgage holders who couldn't afford their mortgages to begin with, and because they were adjustable rates, that added inflation increased their payments to the point that they defaulted. So it's all interrelated. I'm not saying that real estate wasn't the prime mover in the financial crisis, but never forget the role of oil prices. Never forget it. It's always there.
That's interesting. I kind of overstated your case there, but as you say, $140 oil had deep repercussions. It's always great talking to you, Art. Thank you very much indeed.
A pleasure, Andrew. Thank you.
Art.